Alright, so this video is on solving quadratics equations, and here's some basic properties that you need to know is that multiplication by 0 is equal to 0, and I'll explain why that's important to you in a second, and that quadratics factor into a linear times a linear. So we're going to combine those two properties, and what you're going to need to do to solve these, just so that you're all aware, is that you're going to have to, first step is called to set your quadratic, okay, to equal to 0, and the second step is then going to be to factor your quadratic, and the third step is going to be solve for your zeros. And I'll explain all that, but this is your basic 3 steps to solving a quadratic equation. So the problems I'll be going over in this problem, or in this, are kind of introductory, so we'll be going over what if the leading coefficient is 1, or what if the leading coefficient is prime. So let's get into those examples. Alright, so example 1 says x squared minus 5x minus 17. So remember that step 1 was to set your quadratic equal to 0, so just to highlight this for you, so here is my quadratic, and my quadratic is currently equal to 7, so the way I make it equal to 0 is I use the subtraction property of equality, except I'm not going to get rid of anything on the quadratic side. I'm going to get rid of the 7 on the other side, so 7 minus 7 makes 0. Remember, when you add opposites, they make 0. And then I subtract 7 here. Okay, and where I go from here is that this is now x squared minus 5x minus 24, and that is equal to 0. So now you're not going to get rid of these. Like, don't get rid of them, okay? It's important that you say it's equal to 0. All right, so then from here, we're going to now factor this quadratic. Now, because the leading coefficient is 1, we can think about breaking this apart right away. So your first linear is going to have to be an x, so you separate your x squared there, and you get x times x, which makes x squared. And now we're thinking about what are some factors of 24. So factors of 24, all right, so negative 24 that are going to make negative 5. So 1 times negative 24, negative 1 times 24, 2 times negative 12, negative 2 times 12, 3 times negative 8, and I think that's where I'm going to stop. Negative 3 times 8, because I think that's all. Well, there's 4 times 6, but I already know the answers in one of these, so I'm going to stop here. So this doesn't work when you combine them. Doesn't make negative 5, doesn't make negative 5, not negative 5, not negative 5. There we go, there's negative 5. So my factors are plus 3 and minus 8. Now, we still say that that equals to 0. Okay, so now here's where we're going to use this, this a times 0 equals 0. So to solve this problem, what we're going to claim is that if this linear pair were 0, then the entire quadratic would be 0. Or if this linear term were 0, then the whole thing would be 0. So the last step to solve this is we claim the first linear pair of x plus 3. What if that equals 0? Or we could have had this x minus 8 if that makes 0. And then from there, we just solve these linear problems. So minus 3, we will get x equals negative 3. And if we solve this one, we add 8. So, or x equals positive 8, and then we're done. So we have two answers in this case. Because it's a quadratic, we have x equals negative 3 or x equals 8. And then that's our final answer. So when you're going through these problems, it's a tiny bit of a step, but if you're in my class, I won't give you credit on your work if I don't see the full process. So many teachers, they want to see the full process here. So without showing the full process, you won't get work. So I suggest, going through it. Now, this part over here, do you have to show it? No, not necessarily. You could do that in your head, but the rest of it does have to be shown. All right, so here we go. Next problem. All right, so again, the first step 1 is to set the quadratic equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract this 2, and I get 3b squared plus 25b plus 8 is equal to 0. And then the second step here is going to be to factor. Well, the nice thing is that I have a prime leading coefficient. So again, prime leading coefficient, it becomes 3b. And I know it will have to be b. And then I go over here. So then the next thing I'm going to do, just to continue on with my factoring, all right, is I'll look at factors of 8. So factors of 8 are 1 and 8, 2 and 4. So there they are. So now when I get to this, okay, remember you're going to take this 3b and you're going to distribute it to this term, and this single 1b is going to multiply this term. And when you add those together, you then need to get 25. So when I'm thinking about this problem, one of these numbers is going to be tripled, and then the other will be added to it to make 25. Well, I know that if I triple 8, I get 24, and 24 plus 1 makes 25. So if I do 3 times 8, get positive 24, and then I add the 1b to it, then I will have my answer. So now we're not done because this is solving by using factoring. Okay, if you want to watch my video on factoring, I suggest you watch that first, because if you can't know how to factor, the process of factoring, this video is not meant to teach that. This video is meant to teach the process of solving. So now that I have it factored, what I will do is take each individual linear term and I will make my zeros. So 3b plus 1 equals 0, or this b plus 8 could equal 0. And that has to do with that property of a times 0 equals 0. We're trying to make this happen. So we're trying to just make one of our factors into a 0. And here we have linear factors. So linear factor 1 equals 0, or linear factor 2 equals 0. So linear factor 1 makes 0, or linear factor 2 makes 0. And then we go ahead and solve it. So subtract 1, 3b equals negative 1. Divide by 3, we get b equals negative 1/3. Or, solving this one, subtract 8, or we get b equals negative 8. And there you go. It's then solved. Okay, let's just do one more example here. All right, so next example, again, it's just another prime leading coefficient, which is nice, but here we go. So first step 1 is, again, set your quadratic equal to 0. So I'm adding 3, so 5x squared plus 2x minus 16 is equal to 0. So now we can go through the factoring process. So you get 5x. So because it's prime, I know it has to be a 5x and an x, equals 0. So now I'm going to look at factors of 16 that are going to enable me to make a positive 2. So negative 16. So 1, negative 16, negative 1, 16, 2, and negative 8, negative 2, and 8. And I think I'm going to try that one because I know 5 times 2 is 10. And 10 take away 8. Yep, that's going to be it. So here we go. I know that this is going to be my pair. Because if I take 2 and I multiply it by 5, right, 2 times 5, and then I take away 8, I'm going to get 2, and I'm perfect. So I write the positive 2 over here, and I write the negative 8 factor over here, and then it now will be factored. So then from here, I'm going to go ahead and solve it. So this is my last step. You take the first linear term, 5x minus 8, say it could be 0, or you say that the second factor term could be 0. So then you solve them. So plus 8, you get 5x equals 8, which means x equals 8/5, or, okay, x, so minus 2 equals negative 2. So my final answer for this problem, okay, is going to have two solutions, two possibilities. So my first one is x equals 8/5, or it could also equal negative 2. You can write this as a comma if you want. Generally speaking, if you write it as a comma, most people write it in order. So we could say x is negative 2, comma, or 8/5, and then you can circle that up. So you can write your answer like that. You could write or in between, whichever your teacher wants to see. So either one is acceptable. So I hope that helps, but that is how you solve a quadratic equation by factoring.